Ready? Okay, so the topic for today is really addressing a question that somebody asked me. Somebody came over to me and they asked me, their family is not religious, and they inquired regarding the possibility of going to them. The parents invited them home. The parents, for the time being, don't keep kosher, but they assured them that they will, adhere to all the standards of kosher, all the halachas of kashrus, and they'll make sure their food is kosher. The question that they had was whether or not they can rely on their parents' statement. Do they have an emunus? Torah prescribes certain standards of emunus, something to be believed, and do they meet that metric? So, sorry, what did you say? No, the parents are inviting them home, and the parents are saying, we don't keep kosher, but we know you do. We want you to come visit us. We will make sure we have kosher food ready for you. What would be the other way? And what they ensure? Yeah, I guess you could apply the other way also. Avi, there's something wrong. So this is a question that it's not unique to our scenario. It's a question that many Rabbanim have to deal with, especially nowadays. We're dealing with Bisman Hanavi, Malachi said, like all this. Many people, you have many people that are coming back from Frumkeit to keeping kashrus, and family members, Leisata, have yet to make that transition. So the question is,
You have it here in the community. The yeshiva boys who don't come to the school boys because they're not familiar.
Yeah, so
it's simple. I'm telling you now it's happening.
You don't have to go to extreme cases.
Like, for example, Avi the guy, he's a nice guy. He doesn't send his kids to other people's home because he's better. His kids are better than my kids.
So like Mendy said, this question is, we get to the end. So like when Mendy addressed, to really get to the crux of this question, to find out, we first have to assert, yesterday I ate out. What did I rely on to eat at my house, to rely on my host's kashrus? How did I do it? How do I know that what they served me was kosher? Typically, when I need to assert a ne'emanus, a fact in halacha, I need two witnesses. I need two eidim. I didn't have two eidim come to me and tell me that everything that's done in this kitchen is appropriate and everything like that. So how did I rely on the kashrus of my host? So for that, the Gemara in Kulin says, principle that eid echad nem b'isurin. When it comes to isurin, kashrus, shita, various things in that regard, one witness is enough, and even people that aren't kosher la'edus are kosher, are believed to have the status of testifying that this is not a davar shalisr, that this item is permissible to consume. And that's what Rashi says there in Chulam Daf Yud Amud Aleph. Rashi says, I'll read it inside, the Yachid v'Yachid, and means the Torah believed every individual Jew that they shechted their animals that they shechted appropriately, that they salted the meat appropriately. Torah gives a certain emunus to Jews that they keep the laws of kashrus. That's what Rashi writes. And Tosfos in Nido says, Tosfos and Gittin and Daf Beis Amud Beis says that this fact every person, every couple relies on, because the husband relies on his wife. Tell him if she's tamei or tar, and it's a davar shalisr, and she's believed. We don't require any form of assertion to discern if she's tar or tamei. Her word's enough. So for Safra law, Tosfos learns out from Safra law that eid echad is neman b'isur. Yeah, he asserts that it has to be the case. So, and therefore, when we're invited out Shabbos day, like I was, we're able to go out and rely on the kashrus of our hosts. That's what Rashi and Yevamah says. And we find that it's not only to the degree that Torah allowed people like us, to rely on each other, that I can rely on my neighbor, but to the degree that the Kehanim relied on Kol Yisrael. There's a mitzvah of the Torah to give certain parts of the animal that you shech to the Kohen, and the Kohen would eat it. And we don't find anywhere that the Kohen had to check who did the shechita. People, the Kohen didn't know, show up in his house, say, this is my turma, this is what I have to give, my matnas kahuna, and the Kohen relied on that. Correct. Shechted back home, and they bought the cuts of meat that had to go to the Kohen. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna get to add it. This is the din in principle.
What is showing you that today's Meshubas is not even Jewish. הבן שלו לא יכול לספק יותר שלך, הבן שלו לא מהות.
So that's so this is the din in its ideal form. This is the din in its ideal form, but we find two conditions to be able to say Echad, and I think everybody around the table would agree that they make sense. The first nine is that the person has to simply know what kashrus means, what it means to be kosher. I was speaking to a shliach, and the shliach told me that he had a balabas that thought that what makes a cow kosher, what makes an animal kosher, is that it's circumcised. So you have to know what's kashrus to say it's kosher. So that's the first nine. You have to know what it is. And we find that this is what happened, that the Gemara, that the Rambam brings down, it's brought down, that when Chazal saw that the Amei Haaretz, the regular people, weren't bucking, didn't know Hilchos Tumah V'Taharos, they were geyser that you can't rely on them because they don't know the halachas. They could be meaning well, they could be telling you it's kosher. There's no intention to do anything wrong, Chas v'Shalom, but there's a heady idea. There's a lack of knowledge amongst the people, and unless certain prerequisites are met, the Rambam says they have to have a Kabbalah in front of a basin, that they're going to learn Hilchos Tumah V'Tahara, they're going to take it on. Beyond that, without that, you can't rely on them for Tumah V'Tahara. That's the first condition. But they have to know what the halachas are. And we find similar things that in Shulchan Aruch, Yordeh, and Aleph, Suf Aleph, the Mechaber says that even though Medina de Gemara, if I simply read the Gemara, any shaykhit I can rely on their shita, the Mechaber says when it's possible, you have to pasha check that the shaykhit knows Hilchos Shchita, because not everybody knows, and it could be he's a shaykhit. You have to make sure, you have to ascertain his level of knowledge. That's the first condition. I think we could all agree to that one. The second one is a similar one, that they can't be mezalzel by. They can't denigrate it. They have to treat it with respect and reverence. And so too, we find that Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the Gemara Yerushalmi inside the Parkes Halacha Aleph tells us that Bisman Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he found that the Amei Haaretz were mezalzel and truma maestros. They didn't view it with the appropriate reverence. They weren't separating truma and maestros. So Chazal were geyser again that you can't rely on Amei Haaretz, on the average, a regular person, to say that they separated truma and maestros, because it's something they weren't nizar by. It's nothing when they were mezalzel in. That's the mind. That's the Amei Haaretz was somebody, for the most part, is an unlearned person. The regular people, your average farmer, you can't rely on, because people weren't really. There were people that weren't really as well educated or didn't really treat certain gzeiros with such respect or reverence. So the average person, unless I ascertain that he is somebody that Demai, what did they make you do to Demai? They made you separate Trumas and Maestros again. That's what they were going to say. So this was only about Trumas and Maestros. This wasn't about Shkita.
Homework for Pesach. We got to ask me what's the recipe for matzah. So, 5 1/4 it's clock, but we got to ask rabbit.
Yeah. So
it's strict. It's one thing, right?
What?
Matzahs.
Yes. More than Shkita? Well, meaning if you have, there's a prerequisite. The person knows the laws, knows the halachas. So that same prerequisite applies to both.
What's the that somebody
like if people get bad influence from others, it's obviously so important that the right thing. I mean, what's the right thing? That's the conversation.
So the conversation, we started off with the question, but this is just an introduction to get to the question. The question was, there's somebody about Tuva that had reached out, that their parents are not from at the moment, and they really wanted to come visit for Shabbos. They said, we don't keep kosher, but we're going to buy kosher food. And the question was, can you rely on that statement that they're going to buy kosher food?
There's a lot of person who doesn't credit Shabbos that is not trusted.
Oh, so that's what we're going to see. This is an introduction to get to that point. It's the only introduction to get to that point. So based on that principle, based on these two halachas, the mechaber passes and kufi test somebody that doesn't keep kosher, somebody that eats neveils and treifus, somebody Rahman al does not have an emunus to say that this is kosher because they're mezalzel by. They don't keep the mitzvah, they don't keep the halacha, therefore they lose their trustworthiness, their emunus to say that this is kosher. So if we would end here, based on what we found, the answer would be an unfortunate no. An unfortunate no. They don't meet the requirements of ne'emanus. Therefore, you can't rely on them. But there's a tshuva of Moshe. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe Chelik Aleph Siman Nun Daled writes that when he was in Russia, before he came to America, he got a letter from Moscow. There was a couple in Moscow, an older couple, that they were Yerushalayim, but unfortunately, it was 1934, he writes, the winds of the time, the way things were going, the children were communists. They were no longer religious, and they had come to the point that they were unable to take care of themselves, and they were going to be forced to move into the house of their son and daughter-in-law. And he writes to Rav Moshe, he told Rav Moshe that, my son and daughter-in-law are not they don't keep kosher, but they told me and they promised me that they will keep all the laws of kashrus for me. They'll have a separate kitchen. Everything will be done kedasu kedin when they prepare my food. And he writes, I know they don't have an emunus midin Torah, but is there any way that I can rely on them? Look, I believe them wholeheartedly that they would never do anything to hurt me. I trust them. They would never lie to me. Can I rely on them? Is there a different form of emunus that we can place on them? So Rav Moshe's Mechadash, Rav Moshe says that maybe we can argue there are two forms of ne'emanus. You could believe someone because the Torah gives a din that this person's believed, and then there's a separate form of ne'emanus, a factual ne'emanus, almost a kimli, that I can say I trust this person wholeheartedly. This person would never lie to me, would never cheat me, would never say any distort the truth for me. Kimli b'gabei, I trust this person. And Moshe says that maybe when the person could say on this other fellow, Kimli begaveri, that I trust them entirely, he can rely on them, the kashrus. This is how can I rely on someone when Torah doesn't believe them? So he brings the Gemara in Ksubas. The Gemara in Ksubas on Daf Pei Aleph records a fascinating interaction. It says that Rava was sitting with his beis din. There was this one woman that was obligated to swear in Rava's beis din. Amrale Bas Rav Chizda. Bas Rav Chizda runs into the daughter of Chizda runs into the beis din, who happens to be Rava's wife, and tells her husband, this woman, Achash al Shvua, you can't believe what she says. She's not trustworthy. It says Rava right away, when he heard what his wife said, switched the shvua from one patron to the other and obligated the other woman to give the shvua. And the Gemara says, how did Rava believe her? She's not kasher la'edos. Can't believe in court, be believed in court. And it says, because Kimla Begave, Rava knew her. Rava trusted her, and therefore, even though Torah, another beis din, wouldn't believe her, but because Rava knew her intimately, trusted her intimately, Rava was able to pass it based on her word. The Gemara, though, limits it to its scope. The Gemara goes on to report a different story, that Rav Ada and Rav Papa were sitting together, and somebody came with a shtar to the beis din of Rav Ada, and Rav Papa was sitting there in the background. He came to visit, and he chirps up, and he says, "Shtar barua, it's a paid shtar. The shtar is null, it's void, and therefore this person can no longer collect the debt." Rav Ada turns to him and says, "Do you have somebody else to back up your claim? Do you have a second witness that can give testimony with you?" Rav Papa says, "No, it's just me." Rav Ada says, "I'm sorry that I can't believe you. Eid echad is not neman. One witness is not enough to ascertain the halacha by Dinei Mamanos. The Gemara says, what do you mean? We just told you that Rava relied on Bas Rav Chisda on his wife. Rav Papa is any less than Rav, has less of an Amaras than Rava's wife. The Gemara says Rava knew his wife. He was able to say Kimli. Rav Papa, Rav Ad didn't know him. He was a tzaddik, he was a Talmud Chacham, he was a Shishiva, he was a Rav. But he didn't know him to the degree that he was able to say Kimli. It's not simply that I trust that you're an honest person. It has to be to say Kimli. I have to know you intimately. I have to know you personally. So that's the Gemara. So therefore, Moshe says, there's a similar Gemara in Yavamas. Correct. Very good. Very good. There's a very similar Gemara with Ravada. Very similar Gemara in Yavamas. Oh, so correct. So we're gonna go into Ramosha gives guidelines. So you can't just say Kimli, my neighbor, Kimli on my neighbor. Ramosha is gonna give principles of how you can say it, but so I'll discuss that also. Place can give various guidelines. Correct. So I'll discuss that. We'll get there. It's a very good point. But this is just opening the door. Ramesh is opening the door to this idea. But like Levi said, we can't take this. We can't just take it and go with it. So what are the limitations? What are the parameters to say Kimli? So Ramesh says two things. Ramesh first of all says that we see here that it's not just because I know the person casually. Not just because I know the person casually and I could say, oh, I know him, he's a good guy. It has to be somebody that's, you have a relationship, like you have a relationship with your wife. Rav was able to say it by his wife. So Ramesh says it's only by a family member, only by a father to a son to a father, or something like that, where there's this intimate relationship. Although you can argue from the Gemara, it seems to be that there would have been a possibility for Ravada to say Kimli by Rav Papa. It's just that he didn't know him. All right, that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara doesn't say he's not a family member. The Gemara says he doesn't know him. And like Zev brought the Gemara in Yavamas, seems to want to say Kimli by a non-familiar relationship. But this is Ramesh's opinion, that it has to be specifically a familiar relationship. Why would that be? So Ramesh doesn't address it. But other places can say, it's not just a trust. It's that I would trust this person with everything that I own, all my possessions, my social security, my bank account numbers, everything. I would trust this person with my life. This is someone, and that's what you're doing. I would put my life in their hands because that's what you're doing when you're relying on their kashrus. You're putting your spiritual life on their hands. There's no nemadas within Torah, so it has to be a trust that I trust them completely. This is articulated in a different tshuva by another place where it's somebody's becoming from, the husband's becoming from, and the wife is a little coming along, but she's not there yet. And he wants to start keeping Paras of Mishpacha. But she is not Shemer Shabbos, she is not Shemer Kashrus yet, but she says, out of my love for you, I will agree to keep Paras of Mishpacha. Question is, does she have Nemanos? So again, there's a tshuva there, and the place that goes, well, it depends on your relationship with your wife. Depends, not every marriage is so sweet that you can rely and say Kimli. So he goes through, but those are the parameters that you trust this person to the end to agree with your life. That's what Ramosha says. And he also says that it has to be in a real, even that's not enough for Ramosha. He needs it to be that there's really no other way around it. Again, he says, like the case I'm addressing, we're dealing with an elderly couple. Without them, they wouldn't be able to, who's going to take care of them? They need this. So it has to be really dire circumstances. And only then can you rely on it. And therefore, whenever this question comes up, it's up to the Rav, the parties involved, to ascertain how much of a need it is, how important is it, how dire the situation is, etc. So that's Ramosha. There's a little bit of a siyata, a helping hand for Ramosha, the tshuva that I found from the Tashbetz. The Tashbetz writes the following: there was wine that had come from Spain, from Maranos, the Anusim, at that time, had sent a bottle of wine to North Africa, to the Tashbitz's town, and somebody had labeled it kosher. So now typically, in a halachic sense, the Anusim had lost their Nemanos. Maros have lost their Nemanos because by no fault of their own, at least that's the approach that we take, by no fault of their own, they were Anos, but they didn't necessarily live the most rigorous halachic lives. So therefore, they were not Nemon, their Yayin was Aser, they were not Nemon Binyan and kashrus. Somebody came to the Taj and said, well, what if I know this person? I know this person to be an upstanding person, to be a frum person. Can I rely on his kashrus? Tashbit says, in such a scenario where you know the person, that's different, and you can rely, you could say that I rely on the kashrus and you go have the wine. Now, it's similar to Rav Moshe, but there's a major distinction that can be made between the two. The Tashbit is allowing you to establish the person's nemanos that he is indeed an Eidacha, based on your really intimate knowledge of him. Even though, according to the average person looking in, they wouldn't be Neman, the Tashbit is allowing this person to open up, pull back the curtain and say, no, this person is really an honest and upstanding person. As opposed to Rav Moshe is saying, even if you can't do that, you can't reveal that really this person is from, really this person has an nemanos. You're not doing that. You're moida that this person has no nemanos with Torah. This person does not necessarily have the reverence with respect for halacha. But I trust them that because of our relationship, they wouldn't lie to me. There, Moshe gives room to rely on what they say. So it's a step further than the Tashbitz, but it's a similar, if you will, progression of the idea.
What about like when he's saying that, let's say, a different place? My mother grew up Catholic from enough people. You not send your children to like your house and they say, no, we're going to do it. We understand they go to sixth school.
Sure.
They send the rules, but they don't keep kosher.
They don't keep kosher in the rule? No.
They go to the school they're not from. They're going to give you a test or like whatever they're coming from. And then your kid wants to go play there and you say, no, we understand. It's a kidney.
But it's not a kibbutz.
The parents say, no.
But I don't think that meets the parameters that Rav Moshe set. Meaning, everybody should speak to the Rav to define those parameters. The parameters that Rav Moshe set are the following: it's a familiar relationship, meaning it's a family, and also that's what Rav Moshe says. It has to be family.
Meaning in a case like that, it's better to tell the parents that if my kid's gonna have a play date,
Cut-
please only call me before you finish, whatever.
So how to set up?
Say that they can't go to that function together, whatever they can't go to. The parents usually, I don't know,
Lived in Seymour, so they had a birthday party. We made sure that one of the parents stayed there the whole time. They got food from.
that's different.
So there was a parent downstairs. Someone left for 20 minutes, but we saw the pizza came. They're nice people. They mean well, but they don't have a whole UV bag and shit to not realize.
Like some soccer or something.
Why would I
call the kid?
Not every guy, you just say.
We're not in the school anymore. We're not in the school anymore.
Sorry, what were you saying, Levi?
Not every guy, you just say, hey, he's my friend, I really trust him, I think my social, whatever. But he just doesn't know what's going on.
Correct. So that would be that would be the first parameter that somebody can promise. Sorry, I should have reiterated that. That's the first parameter of Eidacha, that the person has to know the halacha, right? You can't. I'm going to give kosher, but I think kosher is the cow circumcised. Like you have to know. So you have to know that they know. If you eat out, if you would come to my house, I was thinking of going there, but I think it would make the shirt too long. There's a whole second part that maybe we'll leave for a different time. But you would have to ascertain that I, to a certain degree, that I know what kashrus is. So you can say that because you see me, you've spoken to me, knowledge, but you'd have to do some form of an investigation to a certain degree of knowledge that I know it. You know. There you go. See, there's a certain knowledge, and that's not saying that the person's not trustworthy, right? That's just a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge of what's permitted, what's allowed. That's all. So that's the basic conversation, basic discussion.
So
going to what he's saying though, let's say if there is a family that's fully kosher from everything like that, they don't get called Yisrael. Trustworthy people. So if you say, I'm going to send my kid over there, who's only going to call Yisrael?
That's completely fine because they have nemanos.
They keep kosher, they still keep Yisrael.
So the Ramah addresses that directly. The Ramah speaks about a case that I hold that something is asr min hadin, asr min hadin, and another person holds it's mutter min hadin. They say it's mutter not because they don't keep kosher, but because they have rabbanim that are mekel or that hold it's okay. The Ramah wants to know: can I rely on their kashrus? Well, says they don't lose their nemanos to say what's kosher. They still keep kosher. They have just a different rub. So obviously you can't go ahead and have their not called Yisrael food, but you can go and have their meat, have their flesh, and have other things. You can't have their dishes. You can't have their milk dishes.
The guy goes for those, he knows everything perfectly, and he knows all of them. He knows better than you, but he's not good. And he might say, no, I'm going to do it.
That's zilzul. It's no nemanos.
Zilzul overrides.
Yeah. It's two conditions. You need both conditions need to be met.
Can you say that it will apply to a larger, let's say, this guy has a market and he's zilzul, and he say, okay, the caterer.
You'd have to see the caterer. Yeah, you need a hashkach. You need a caterer.
It's zilzul. That take away from this guy's zilzul.
So you might, that would be on the mashgiach. That's saying that not to say anything, but oftentimes people that know the halachas and don't. Oftentimes the biggest problem the mashgiach can attest to this or speak for this. But oftentimes kashrus agencies find the most difficult with somebody with a patron that thinks they know hilchas kashrus and it doesn't respect hilchas kashrus. That's the worst. The guy that doesn't know anything and they let the rabbi run the show.
I'll give you a story just on that quickly. There was someone that came, an ex-Lubavitcher came to when they got whatever. Lubavitcher, but whatever, he got his Yaakov at home. That kind of Lubavitcher. He wants to open up a restaurant in Crown Heights. He came to us and he was talking about, and he starts going in, my plate is shot from Todd and this and that, and then we're like, you know what? Better find a different option.
So that's something to keep in mind. That's the basic discussion. There's a whole nother leg of this conversation that I don't want it to go for too long, but there's a whole nother step that when money gets involved. When money gets involved, what happens to Eidachot? I'm happy to continue or stop, whatever people are interested in.
So let's say go back to the case when you originally brought us a question. So parents that you trust, they love their kids and they really want to help out, they say, we're going to go to the kosher store, you gave us a name, we're going to buy paper plates, we're going to buy takeaway food. So at that point, it becomes an issue of do you trust your parents or not?
So take it, right, they're going to buy takeout.
Let's say they say we're buying takeout, we're going to keep the label
So
on.
that's fine. Because you're not relying on them.
So
They're like the Uber Eats person.
Take it one step further. Let's say they say we went to the kosher store and they gave us takeaway food, it doesn't have the wrapper on it. So they need something.
Really, it's
Because that's a question of trust. If your parents trust them, they're not being negative about it. They're trying to work out.
So Rav Moshe does is Rav Moshe gives us an avenue to pursue the question, and it would be up to the person to speak to their Rav to really define that relationship and that level of trust they have in their parents, or the level of respect that the parents have for their kashrus. Because really what this hinges on is that not only do you trust them entirely, but that they respect your decisions. So that would be, on every person to ascertain. So, okay. So I guess we'll stop here. Sorry, what? So then it doesn't mean anything. So it would have to be that they know something. So Rav Moshe came to Rav Moshe thinking about the case of the ex-Lubavitcher. That's Rav Moshe's case. The guy that couldn't find out. That's no longer from. But you'd have to have what they know, so that also might limit what you believe them for.
send the person home.
If they know that meat has to have actual date, and I can take the meat, but I don't know if I can rely on them that they I don't know that the catering that they use was the right catering because they don't know whatever. But yeah, they bought kosher meat. Whatever. And every relationship, every person would be different. Parameters would be different. Okay. So I guess next time we can discuss money.